everybody, welcome back to Startup Happy Hour. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and I'm here today with our guest, David Kobrosky. He is the co-founder at Intros, and I'm going to bring him on to tell you more about that. It's a new project that he's been working on. So, hey, David, welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey, Diana. No, I'm excited to be here, too. I've heard a lot of good things, and I'm a fan of the podcast.
Awesome. So to start us off, why don't you just tell us a little bit more about what Intros is, how you got the idea to start it, and sort of like what you're working on right now.
Yeah, it's been probably 3-4 big iterations. Since we began 18 months ago to almost 2 years. So my co-founder and I really into this whole personal connection space where you bring people together in different ways. We started off working on a little product is like a personal relationship manager that would look at your the people you interact with and then figure out ways for you to remind you to reach out to them, really just help you be more of a thoughtful friend. That led into something that plugs into your calendar and would also manage events and whatnot around meetings and friends. So imagine before having this, getting a little blurb about the person you're about to meet. Little things like that. We found people didn't like it that much, or they liked it, but they weren't going to pay for it. So we thought a lot about this relationship creation space. So thinking about how people meet new individuals. So we created something called Meet Sunday at that point, which was really this idea of every Sunday, based on your interest, personality traits, we'd match you with someone else who's also a user, and we set up a little video chat. And we, at the time I was working at a company called Data Robot, and I saw that they did a internal introduction system where they would someone in HR would manually for 3-4 hours, every week would go through and figure out who should meet each other, who's in the system. So they just randomly make matches, and then they'd send emails out that day. And I looked more into it. I was like, this is kind of what we're doing with Meet Sunday anyways. And I'm seeing a company doing this, or other groups, communities, companies doing this. And we found that there are hundreds, thousands of these types of communities that are trying to bring their people together for these one-on-one or small group settings. And we're doing either manually or doing it based on random matching. So we said, you know what, we can do this better. So I think that's really where we shifted our focus this past fall. And after that, dropped out of Michigan in end of December. Didn't go to school this semester and went full time. And my co-founder will be joining me full time. He just put in his two weeks of leave at Goldman. He runs almost all of commodities trading there, so the tech there. So he'll be joining me as well. So we make connections and introductions in existing communities.
Got it. Okay, so I definitely want to dive into your backstory because there's a lot to unpack there. But I just want to make sure I'm fully understanding what Intros is today. So is it sort of like a networking matching thing? Like as you were talking about the previous iteration of it, it actually reminded me of my company uses something called Donut. You might be familiar with it, but it automatically matches two people from the company every week, and you're supposed to. It just matches you on Slack, and then you're supposed to get on a call or answer fun questions together or whatever that may be. I found that it doesn't, it sort of works a little bit because at the end of the day, it's on the two people to make that connection, to set up the call, to engage with each other. And if they choose not to, then that connection still isn't made. So I don't know, maybe talk a little bit about how those problems are addressed with the current version of Intros and how you make sure that these connections are actually formed.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to Donut, one of the key things that I think they missed is really this idea of having a reason for a meeting to happen. If you were to be a full-time introduction maker in a community, then the way you would do it is you wouldn't just randomly put people together and say, hey, this is your donut match for the week. Go chat. You'd figure out what are people's goals. What are the things that they want out of the community. What are the things that makes them really tick, and then you figure out everyone else in the community, similar for them, and really figure out based on all of those who want to be part of this system, who at that certain week at that certain time would be the best possible match to be made, and then not just the match itself, but then the next step of saying and communicating, this is why that's happening. Not just putting two people in a room and saying, hey, go chat. That works sometimes. That works in companies because, some companies, because they want to emulate the water cooler, right? You're getting a quick snack and you bump into someone. That's what they want to mimic. But on our side, we're really thinking about how to make a meaningful relationship, how to make a meaningful discussion, and that doesn't come from randomness. That comes from being intentional and making sure there's purpose behind why this is happening. So I think it's like one of the kind of core, at least positioning ways, and then product-wise is a lot of things we do to facilitate that, whether it be these icebreaker questions to get the conversation going, or even reviews to get your matches better over time. That's a key thing too.
So how does intros, like what does the algorithm do or know that makes these connections make sense, right? So,
yeah.
So for instance, like sometimes I might get connected with, so like I run content marketing. I might get connected with a developer from my team, and on a day-to-day basis, maybe we have nothing in common, but maybe we're both working on a big launch that's happening next week where, the developer is on the development side of it and then I'm on the marketing side of it, but we're working on the same project. So would intros then know, that like, oh, this marketer and this developer are both working on the same project, so let's connect them this week. It's got to be this week because normally they don't work together.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think a slightly further version of what we have today would be able to have the functionality. The way we use it today, and I think something that sets us apart here, is we don't know what makes a meaningful introduction between two people in a community, and we like very like honest about that. Like realistically, every community has their own culture. They have their own vibe. They have their own goals. The community manager has their own idea of what a good match looks like. The individual people has a good idea of what that match looks like. So our current algorithm, we actually tell the admin, the community manager, you decide what are the factors that lead to a good match. So the community admin or the community manager would indicate, one of the main reasons that will make have these people match is if they're working on a project at like a similar time, and then like in the onboarding form when you would join that intros, you would indicate this is my yes, like I am. I also want to meet someone who's working on like this project at the same time. So it's this idea of let's make the tools so the admin and the individuals can choose for themselves what makes sense for them.
Got it. And so right now is your tool are you mostly selling to companies for them to use internally with their team? Or is this also something that an individual can purchase and say like I get LinkedIn messages all the time from people that are like, hey, like I saw you're connected with this person. Can you connect me with them? I'm looking for a job there, or I want to work with them. Or sometimes I just talk to people like on the podcast and I'm like, oh my gosh, like what you're working on is so in line with another podcast guest that I just had on. Like I have to connect you guys. Can individuals use this as well? Or are you just selling to companies right now?
Yeah, so right now we're focused mainly on these small private communities. I think there's a lot to be said about paid private community and how that's moving. For a lot of companies, it's much more of a nice to have. It's like okay, like it makes sense. It'll help the team cohesion, if you will. For these paid private communities though, or the small intimate groups where maybe they were in person, now they're remote, or maybe they were online native. The only way they connect today is maybe through events, and the only reason people are there is to meet other people. So for them, it's not just like a nice to have; it's a must have. Like they just need this product. So we're actually focusing on these like smaller communities at first. And then as far as second question of are we just selling to these communities and companies now? Right now, yes. Although the way we see it is we're more of an introduction infrastructure company, and what that means is like a future iteration of intros, something like that might be able to be built on top of. So we're thinking a lot longer term about what that might look like. But yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. And so obviously COVID has probably just pushed you guys to iterate and create even faster than you had originally been planning. And then looking forward into the future, where do you see this product being in, a year, 5 years, 10 years? And then where do you see like even longer term, like this whole community of how people meet each other, Like right now, I think since 2020, it's become a lot more normal to meet people online. Like most of the people that I talk to, I would say like 90% of the people I interact with on a day-to-day basis are online and not in person. And this is the world we live in. And so, it's so hard to predict 10 years into the future. If 2020 taught us anything, can't even predict what tomorrow is going to look like. But if you were to try and envision what it looks like to connect with people and meet people in 10 years, like what do you envision is the scenario there?
Yeah. I see what you're saying. Well, first of all, it's definitely moving away from larger networks and moving much more into like verticalized networks, like vertical community platforms. So that's like first and foremost, I think it's like a key distinction. Rather than having just Reddit, this is gonna be this unbundling of Reddit as right where we're gonna have one way to think of this is think about what are the most popular active Reddit channels. I can almost guarantee in the next 10 years there's gonna be some platform built for those individuals. An example is think of a community of writers that lives on Slack. You're like, okay, like that makes sense, right? It's a way for them to connect, maybe send articles there. But if you're a community of writers, one really just obvious feature is maybe in that feed on Slack, being able to post a snippet of your article and then have people comment on certain parts of that or make edits in that feed. Like little things like that, you can imagine that just make a lot more sense. So if someone builds that, then any writer community will use that. That's just fundamentally a better product for that type of community than a Slack. So it's this question of, as these tools get easier to use and as these building these platforms get easier to use or easier to do, you can really see how communities are kind of going to be more and more siloed. So thinking more seriously about where are your homes? What are those layers that sit across these platforms? Is it really that kind of core part of what I could imagine seeing in the next 5-10 years? I think it's definitely going to be where things are moving towards.
I agree with that completely. I've been saying the exact same thing to people. I think any social platform that comes out in the future is going to be very niche specific. It's going to be like a food lovers platform, or it's going to be, depending on a writer's platform or whatever the case, it's going to be very like niche and very interest specific. I don't think we're going to see a lot more of these just very broad, like Facebook, Instagram, like of all interests. Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. All right, so I want to hear a little bit more about your background, how you got to where you are today. There's so much. Take me back to day one. When did you first get interested in startups and entrepreneurship? And then walk me through everything that got you to where you are today.
Yeah, let's hit it. All right. So it really started in skateboarding. It was really big. I used to compete skateboarding. So this is like back 8th grade. I used to go downhill and then I'd compete for something called the longest slide. It was this your board would break traction, or the wheels would break traction, and your wheels would slide with you for 40, 50, 60 feet. And I used to do races, so I got really into that world. And then I found that all the boards out there, I have a very specific way of skating. All the boards out there weren't quite what I envisioned. The concave, where your feet stay on that board, wasn't exactly what I was hoping for. So I ended up creating a 3D mold to put onto the board. So I started selling these molds. People kind of liked them. And then we ended up making boards, boards based on these molds and built a little team around it. We had a bunch of flow riders, we called them, right? Riders that we would give boards to and they'd go around and compete. Eventually, by sophomore year of high school, we had 2 mass-produced boards where we were in 12, 13 skateboard stores around the country. We had 7, we were riders in 7 countries. We had 40 total riders. We had a full-time employee, and we were just really scaling up this little skate company. So that was where a lot of it began. Then I ended up helping build a skate park, and mainly around the funding side. I used to at that point I got really into fundraising for the skate park. We built the first park in Ethiopia with a company called Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, with a company called Make Life Skate Life was the main one, and Ethiopia Skate, and then our group, which is called Skateify, and we helped build that park. And then I found different ways of found the park itself had a lot of structural issues, so I started thinking about ways that we could actually build parks in different ways, and really got in that world, and that led me to event management because I had to run these fundraisers, and as a high schooler, I had to figure out like how we're going to get enough funds to actually make this happen. So I ended up running a few concerts, and these were I think running concerts was one of the most painful, but also powerful lessons on my side. I think this to get 500 people to show up to something. To take a Saturday night and in the middle of summer to like come for an event, it's a very hard thing, and I think and you really get getting comfortable with rejection. I think I reached out. I counted at this one point. I reached out to a total of 1,300 people on Facebook, maybe 1,400, just direct message, try to sell all of them on getting these tickets, and it worked out okay, but we think we broke even or something. But end of the day, I think that was like really where I learned this idea of just getting in the hands of as many people as possible. So that was skateboard world. That was like the start of it. But I can go into more recent side too if you're curious.
Yeah, well, so I'm curious, like you started this back in, I guess, 8th grade initially. It got bigger in high school, and you did all this cool stuff. So at this point, like you're deciding, do I go to college? I've already got my own business? Where do I go from here? You decided to go to college. Like, walk me through that process.
Yeah, I think it was clear I wanted to go to college, right? Maybe I could have made this work. The company wasn't at the point where I could really make a serious living off of it. And so I think at that point I actually was pretty sure I wanted to go to school. I think the more interesting decision I needed to make at some point was fast forward a year and a half, and I got more into the blockchain Bitcoin world. I was doing some research on this concept called NFTs in 2017. 2017 to 2018. Became friends with the CryptoKitty founders. Went to the first NFT hackathon in Hong Kong in 2018. Got really deep in the NFT world, and about 2-3 years ago now. And so at that point, I had the chance to drop out. I actually was pushed to drop out from my boss at one point, Gary Vaynerchuk. He's like a investor, like big media guy, and so I joined his team to run a crypto project for him to engage with fans. So I think that point when I dropped out, then it was like a serious discussion I had to have with friends, family, and there's a lot of like frameworks I used to think about like whether it made sense or not to leave, and I'm glad I did. But happy to dive into those like processes if you're curious about that too.
Yes, please. I would love to hear that. I mean, first of all, how did you land a job with Gary Vee? I'm sure everybody's dying to know that.
So he invested. He's one of the first investors in a company that after my freshman year, I was the first hire at. So that was the initial connection, and the company he invested in was called Roll, and Roll, it was called Turing at the time, then it changed to Roll. And Roll's concept was, let's create a currency for like an individual currency, a cryptocurrency for a specific creator, as a way to incentivize the fandom among their, run their own creator community. So it's really thinking about, if you're an artist, you're an influencer, and you have like things that people want. They want your time, your attention, free swag, your signature. You could almost create, if you have your own currency, then it's a way for people to interact with you. So you could reward it. You can gift it. You can say, hey, if you retweet this post, I'll send you, my own token. So it was a really, really cool concept. And Gary was thinking about something similar in that realm. Can't go too deep into it, but that's what he brought me on board to run a team for him for. So, and I think it was lucky because he was an investor in this company, and he needed someone who understood this technology. He asked my previous bosses, hey, like, do you know anyone who could do this? And they said, well, they would have to come from our team. And right now, the only person who has that experience is this kid who's, 19 years old at Michigan. You could probably convince him to drop out. So Gary's like, great, I'll bring him to New York and I'll convince him. So he brought me to New York, me and Gary in a room, and Gary, just convinced me to leave school. So that was that little story there.
That's awesome. Okay, so I'm going to take this detour even farther. I will get back to your whole framework about how you decided whether or not to drop out of school, but I have to take this detour. I was going to save this for Explain Your Tweet because I know you've tweeted about it. But so tell me, you got into the NFT space back in 2017, 2018, which is super early days for NFTs. Like it's just starting to explode now, and a lot of people still, have maybe been hearing the buzzwords NFT thrown around out there, but not sure what it is. So a couple of questions for you is, how did you initially start learning about blockchain and NFTs back in 2017, 2018? And then how would you explain NFT to somebody who still doesn't know what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually got more into it in 2016. So that was when I first got into the Bitcoin Ethereum world. I had a few friends who were deep in Ethereum, like got into the Ethereum ICO in 2014, 2015. I think it was 2014. And they brought me to TechCrunch Disrupt. It was like a little hackathon in New York. So it was spring of 2016. We were there, and they came up with this concept called Bit Homing Quant. And it was, little, clearly a pun. And the concept is for quants, so those who make trading algorithms, to enable investors to invest Bitcoin in their trading algorithms to kind of like surpass all the typical processes in order to invest in someone's fund, if you will. And it was just a goofy hackathon project. It never really went anywhere too serious, but I think that was my introduction to the space. So, and then I think after that I learned more about Ethereum, and I love just the concept of being able to programmable money is like just the coolest thing in the world. And I heard the idea of making it so someone could be banked or have access to financial freedom without actually having an identity. And that was just the coolest thing. It's like, oh, if you live in the internet, like that, if you grew up from the internet, that just makes so much sense, like obviously. And if you have to travel 30, 40 miles to the nearest bank and you can't get there, like that also makes a ton of sense. If you have access to the internet, you should also have access to finance. Like that's a very intuitive thing that people in America, at least including myself, is like, oh yeah, obviously. But if you can't trust the bank nearby, right? If you're in like a maybe not as like privileged a place as the United States, like that's a huge issue. If you don't have the stability of like a local currency, that's an issue. So that got me more excited about it. And then what that actually led to, and how I found out about NFTs, I heard the story. It was a story around this concept of like a dragon slayer, I think was the name. And it was during the time of like the Venezuelan currency. I forget the name of it, but essentially what happened is it was inflated by the government, and then essentially just wasn't valuable at all anymore. They had to do something with oil. But the point is you had thousands of individuals who like had their life savings in this currency and instantly disappeared. So they wanted to do anything they could to get their hands on a stable currency. And for them, this most stable currency that they could get their hands on was Bitcoin. And the reason they could do it is that they would actually kill these dragons in this video game, and then they would sell the booty, they would call it, like the gold that these dragons had in the video game, and sell it for Bitcoin on these exchanges that were just starting to pop up. This is 2016, 2017, and then they actually made a lot of their living through Bitcoin that they got because they sold digital scarce items, through this video game that they had access to. And I was like, wait a second, you're telling me like people are going through this like extreme extent to get like a digitally scarce thing that also gave them Bitcoin. And I was like, this is the coolest thing in the world. So maybe a couple days after CryptoKitties came out, I just started I was already on that focused in, and I got one of those Gen Z CryptoKitties. Was like really into that, and then ever since then I just just love the concept around. I used to be big into Yu-Gi-Oh cards too, so anything you can collect, I just geek out over. But that was the coolest thing to me. It's like, wait, you can have something that's digital and scarce. That's insane for transferring, for sharing, for owning something. That's just the coolest thing in the world.
Sure. So for all the skeptics out there, all the haters that are like, why would I buy an NBA Top Shots when I can just YouTube the video? I've already seen it. I watched it live on TV. I can, or YouTube it. Like, explain to them, what is the value of buying an NBA Top Shots or a digital piece of art for people that are like, well, I can just like download the JPEG, or make a copy of this. Like, explain that concept of digital scarcity and why it's maybe more valuable than some people think.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So sometimes you're totally right in believing there's no value in this asset. Like, just because it's scarce doesn't necessarily mean it's by nature valuable. So, right. So with NBA's Top Shot scenario, I think one of the main reasons it's so valuable is you can prove it comes from the NBA, right? Or it comes from the organization that created it, and that's really interesting, right? So it's equivalent of having a Nike ripoff shoe that, right? That you know, it's not actually Nike, but it doesn't have the same quality, but it looks kind of the same. It's the same thing, but that mapping never existed online. Like that example of like like actual authentic shoe versus a fake shoe, that didn't exist online until we had this. We can prove something is scarce and prove it came from an initial like minting address that, you know, crypto, Ethereum address that actually initially created it. So with that in mind, it's really this idea of like being able to transfer and prove that something is in fact where it came from. And as long as you get that concept, then you're good, right? Like that's why if Gucci decided to come out with an NFT, it's probably gonna be pretty, you know, it's gonna work. Like it's gonna do well. The tough thing though is this is where it gets a little hairy. Is like, what if NBA, because it's like a, you know, central entity, you know, it's a company, decides to just like mint thousands of these things? Well, if they created thousands of the same one, then that might be not as valuable as the old NBA Top Shot ones where they had a couple of them. But it doesn't devalue the old ones. It may even make them more valuable because, you know, there's a ton of this other supply, but there's only a few of that one. So maybe it actually makes it more valuable. So, and it's also, a lot of it comes down to, you know, just skepticism of like what humans think something's valued at. Because if you're going to ask this question, you also have to ask the question of money. And like, what makes money valuable? Humans make money valuable. The story behind this money makes the money valuable. So as long as you can prove something's digital and scarce, then you can argue it has value. But I wouldn't say anything has inherent value. So it's a hard thing.
Yeah, for sure. I know, I get what you're saying. And then the tweet that I actually was going to call out, it was this whole thread, but one thing that you tweeted was NFTs are a way to show off status, and then NFTs are a key to access digital communities. And so I wanted to ask you about sort of like the connection between where you see NFTs and communities and, you know, intros, like connecting this back to intros, maybe like where do you see that gap being bridged? Because these are two things that maybe people aren't really like connecting to each other right away, but you obviously see that connection. So can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I love that. What a thoughtful. Yeah, I like that a lot. The big thing here is understanding like access, and a lot of communities today online, it's open, it's free, it's Reddit. A lot of the new communities online that are forming are private, invite only, has some barrier to entry. It could be money, it could be an application. And these private Slack channels are becoming very, very secretive, right? These Telegram groups you have to get into. Now, there's different ways to get into those groups. There's money, right? There's the application. One interesting one is if you have a crypto wallet and you have a token, a crypto kitty or whatever that NFT or whatever that token is that you can own and prove you own. Well, maybe that's another way to access the community. And the way it would work is when you go to that community on your phone or your computer, they'd be able to validate whether or not you actually have that token in your wallet. And if you do have that access token, then great, you're in. You can be there. Now, why is this interesting? Well, what if you ran a community that's like pretty interesting, pretty hard to get into, very like exciting? People are really want to get into it. There's a huge wait list. And you say there's only 500 spots. All right, then it's like, and not only do you say there's 500 spots, but you bake it into the rule book of this community. So by nature, there's this scarcity to this community, and that's kind of cool. All right, because now that even if someone wants to change that, they can't change that. Maybe they can make a new community and whatnot, but that's like a really interesting cool use case here. If I want to trade that ownership to that community, maybe I could do so. So it's a real, or like ownership of the community, but also like ownership or have access to the community. So there's all these like new ways of moving around ownership whether that ownership is like access to something or the ownership is the community itself. And I think that's fascinating. Like, imagine owning a part of the community, and then the community makes a lot of money off of it. And then because you own that access token, it also represents ownership over the community. So then now you have like a stake in this group of people. Like, that's like a weird way to think of it, but that's possible.
Yeah, for sure. That, and I think like we've already seen some artists, come out and do this with releasing tokens that give fans access to certain things. Like, actually today, well, we're recording this on March 5th. This is going to come out probably a bit later, but today, like, Kings of Leon just released a new, NFT drop, and I think they dropped 3 different types of tokens, and one of them was you could get like lifetime backstage access to all their shows or something, which is pretty cool. So like, I think that's a big access to community. I can see artists coming out and saying, you can get in my small community of 10 super fans, and you can have access to me whenever. You can have my cell phone number and you can text me, which would be pretty sweet. Or I can see like startups doing the same thing, like that are very niched down and saying, we're going to hand out, like you said, like 50 access tokens, and you have to have one of these tokens to be part of this exclusive community. And it's a great way to network. It's a great way to find other people with similar interests, to make friends, like whatever it is that you want to get out of these connections, you can get out of and identify. It's almost like a fast track to identifying people with similar interests and people with similar goals that are anywhere, not just in the country, but in the whole world. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, right. If the only way you can earn a token is by going to 7 of this one musician's concerts, and that's the only way you can possibly get this token, and then you because you go to all those concerts and you prove you went there because of this ticket, you're probably a super fan of that person. And then now you can show off that to other super fans, and now you have this like inside group created around this idea of like dedication that you can actually prove rather than just having a ticket on your wall.
For sure. Okay, well, thank you for going down this NFT rabbit hole with me. Let's go back to what we were originally talking about, which is you dropping out of college. So walk me through the framework that you went through when deciding whether it was a good decision for you to drop out of college or not.
Yeah, so there's 2 times I dropped out, because I actually ended up going back after working with Gary for a little bit. But I'll go through the first one, and then I think second one, because they both are one is another year and a half later. But so slightly different. But at the time, the big question was, how unique is this opportunity? And the reason that's a really important question to ask is you should always ask yourself, if you're about to drop out, in a year or 2 from now, could I get an equal or just as cool opportunity? Right? Like, will I be further along as a human in my skills and my knowledge that if I wanted this type of thing then, I'd be able to get that? And if the answer is yes, then you should probably stick in school, right? Because you want to be long-term greedy here. You want, that's the big thing. Is like let's be as long-term thinking as possible. And in my scenario, with Gary's project and role in this kind of crypto world, it was very clear to me that this was something that was very time sensitive. They needed someone to manage this. If they weren't going to hire me, then they would take 3-4 months to find someone who could do the job. And it was something that I realized, if everything worked out, then this could be the world's arguably maybe most used token, because it'd be like a very easy access for a lot of for very low barrier to get involved. Like, if you have a token that represents a big influencer's attention, if you will, then I can imagine that being a very viral concept. So I was like, okay, if this is a chance as 19, 20 years old, I could own this product, then that'd be a really, really exciting thing. And then on that same note, also recognizing your worst case scenario. My worst case scenario is I went back to school and I take a semester off, a summer off, right? And that's essentially what happened. I ended up going back. There was some legal issues with actually launching this around taxes. If you own this asset and then later on it's more valued, how's that going to be taxed? It wasn't very certain at the time. The whole security thing the whole debate was going on around securities. So because of that, there was much lower risk profile. So I wanted to wanted to go back to school because it wasn't very clear when we'd be launching. So I went back, but the main reason I went back, aside from that timing thing, one is I kind of wanted to be in school anyways, but the second thing is really this idea that you have to know where you are on the trajectory of like your own future success. And what I mean by this is this idea of I thought I was ready for my inflection point. So think about an S curve. When I say an S curve, it's like slow start, and then at some point it ramps up, and it just like scales straight up, and then it kind of tapers off at the top. And then the question I was trying to ask myself is, where along this graph am I, and how big is this overall graph? And all I'm trying to really visualize here is this idea that if I went back to school now and worked on skills, then in 10 years from now, I think I'd be in a better place than I would be if I stayed where I am and just kept grinding away in 10 years from now. But then short term, maybe 2-3 years out, if I stayed with Vayner and didn't go back to school, I might be further along in 3-4 years. But it's always a question of like, what do you optimize for as far as time? Do you optimize for the next 2-3 years? Or do you optimize for the 10 years? And I always prefer to optimize for that that longer term. So that's why I decided to go back to school at that time.
So then you went back to school and then you dropped out again. So walk me through the thought process for the second time that you dropped out.
Yeah, I think it's similar. I think it was timing. I think the market I'm in right now will probably be one in the next 18 months. Year to 18 months. Mainly because it's not like there's a huge barrier to entry. So a large part of this will be distribution, and how do you become a market leader very fast. And that's something we're thinking very intentionally about. So if I waited 6 months, I knew there's already a few semi-competitors outside of Donut that could be arguably in this direct space. And I need to figure out, if not now, could this wait 6 months until we get to that point? And I figured probably not. Again, it's a very fast-moving market. Otherwise, I would have stayed in school, because I'm still in a position where if this ends up selling in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, then I could still go back and finish the degree. I have like 3 or 4 more classes until I can graduate. So that was another part of the thought process here.
Got it. Well, that's all very exciting. One question about the S curve, is that something that you see everybody's life journey sort of looking like an S curve, or was that just your life trajectory that you saw looking like an S curve?
Yeah, I mean, so it's hard to say that. So ideally, it does. I think it's kind of 3 stages that are important to understand here. So one is the basic need stage, which is getting enough capital, having enough of an income where your basic needs are met. And that's depends probably between $20,000 and $50,000, maybe $60,000, but somewhere in that range. Once you know that you will always have that or be able to get that, then you kind of go to this next level, which is the freedom stage, where you already have your basic needs met, but maybe now you can have a family, maybe you can support others, and these other parts you can do too. And then after that you have, and then so that probably goes till maybe past 100K. I'm not sure, but at least money wise. And then I think this other part is like that mission stage. And if you're in that mission stage, then ideally, especially if you want to be a founder, it's this position where it's like, at what point will you be convicted in yourself enough, have the confidence to, and skilled enough to start a company and really take that potential trajectory of like shooting straight up. I think that's the question. It's like optimizing for that point, being as secure as possible. So it's almost this idea of like just trying to get more and more conviction in yourself. So all I'm trying to say is, if you don't have your basic needs met, this S curve probably doesn't exist. You need to focus on the basic needs first. Once you have that in freedom stage, it could potentially exist. And you kind of get that breakaway to like shoot upwards. But ideally, once you get to that point where you feel like, okay, I can support others, and I can be a little more risky with everything, or you're young enough where you can be risky, because my worst case is still I go back to school. Then you can be like, kind of start thinking about what that breakout will be for yourself. And this S curve itself isn't just life. It's like, there's different types of S curves, but I think this one is your success, external success, and however you want to define success. Probably related to being an entrepreneur in some way, in that world.
Yeah, I love that framework of thinking of it. You've given so much advice already, but if you had to think of your number one piece of advice that you would give to, let's say, somebody who's just entering in a college right now and wants to be the founder one day, like what is, to like sort of summarize all of this up, wrap it into a nice bowl, what's that one biggest piece of advice that you would give to a college freshman who wants to be in your position one day?
Yeah, I think the thing that is often not great advice that people do give is usually this idea of, and it's gonna be a little contrarian, but I think it's, freshmen, they often say like, take your time, like have a good time, spend as much time as possible with friends. And I think you should, I think you should take that time, but know your minimum, right? Know like what you need to be happy, satisfied, and like make good memories. And then, at least in the first couple of years of school, don't go beyond that. And the reason I say that as like is, so if my minimum was 2 times a week, I needed to do something social that like, was meaningful. So that meant but I didn't let myself do more than that. I had like a very high bar for it. And the reason I think that's so important is looking back at my time in college, and the times I regret are oftentimes the ones where I could have honestly put more time in and worked harder. And maybe that's like not a very healthy mindset. But the reason I think this is important is your time is so much more valuable when you're 22, 23, 24, 21, like than I think it is when you're 18, 19. In that you should put time in. Nothing comes easy, and I think oftentimes like there's something to be said about those meaningful social experiences. Yes, you should be creating those meaningful social experiences, but if you're scrolling through TikTok, like there's someone else out there who's not, and he's putting their head down and working on what matters to them. So I don't think it's the best advice for everyone, but I think if you want to be in a place where you're running a company and you have others that rely on you, and you can do something that you feel like is your own personal mission in life, then you got to get to that point of conviction in yourself and knowledge as fast as possible. And I think the only way you can do that is put your head down and focus.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. I love that focus and that energy that you have. And I do think that your 20s, especially your early 20s, are the best years to do that, because for most people, you don't really have anyone to worry about besides yourself. You don't have kids or families or anything to worry about. So that's really seize the opportunity and the time to really make the most of it. All right, so this next segment, this is Explain Your Tweet. I know we sort of jumped ahead a little bit, and I already got into this. So I'll just keep it short. I've got 2 tweets that I've pulled out that I'll give you a chance to explain further. The first one is from February 17th, pretty recently. You tweeted, "The only real difference between a creator and a community manager is one has an audience and the other has a community. But now we're asking creators to make our communities." And I've seen you tweet about this connection between content creation or content marketing and community building quite a bit. And so I'm really curious about, especially since I'm a content marketer, so coming from this angle, like I'm really curious about your views on what is this, the connection between the two.
This is good. So there is a distinction first to make between an audience and a community. The relation audience is one to many. That's you connected to every individual. Community is many to many. It's you to everyone else in this community, but it's also those community members to each other. And that's like the first step. It's like, recognize that there is a distinction between the two. Now, the tough thing about an audience is it's not as sustainable. An audience is off, whether or not they're dedicated, they can kind of drift from, one audience to another and kind of go through these phases. But communities live on. Like, communities is where you meet best friends. If someone, Diana, if they're like, I met this person because they also listened to Diana's podcast, and like they found that that was like that similar connection between the two. They're both followers of yours, and because they're a follower of you, it shows this identity about them. My guess is they're probably into startups, and my guess is they probably want to start a company someday or currently run one, and that alone is such a good filtering mechanism. That alone is enough to say, well, okay, yeah, I'd want to meet some of the others, Diana's listeners. And if that's true, that you would want to meet those other folks, then who knows? Like you as a potential community manager of your own audience, to be the one connecting these individuals, could really benefit them. It could really, and if they make a best friend, right? That's the key thing. Is like if they make a best friend because they are, because they're, because of you, then they will credit that to you, and they will be a lifelong fan of yours. So that's another thing too, of like how to activate that. So hopefully that gives a good idea too.
Yeah. So quick follow up to that. So as a content creator and a content marketer, what are some tangible things that I can be doing in my marketing strategy or even in my content creation process that can help build that community around my followers?
A big piece is ownership. Yeah, the best types of communities run themselves. And what I mean by that is, like, if you can get someone else involved and feel like they own a part of this, get that. In crypto, we think of governance. Who has that token that has say in this larger network? How do you let someone feel like and actually be a mini influencer in your own community? Who are those audience members that engage most, and how do you empower them to not only just engage deeper with you, but engage with each other? You make an introduction between these two people, or you do something along those lines. And that's like a really meaningful way to let your audience members find value in one another. The second they find value in one another is the second they become a community.
For sure. Yeah. So it's almost like deeper engagement. It's not just engaging with your fans, but creating engagement at the next level where fans want to engage with each other.
Yeah, or I think a tangible thing to do for that is to create this space for that to happen. Whether it's an office hour with you, it's a Q&A, and whether it's you taking that action, whether you host an event. There's a lot of ways to, people are thinking around how to do that. But yes, exactly. Or start a paid private community of your own. Yeah,
exactly. Put out an NFT that, you have to have that to go to the community.
Exactly, yeah.
I love that. All right. The next tweet I want to call out, this is from February 14th. This is a really long tweet thread, but it started with, I've been measuring different parts of my life for about 2 years now. Every quarter, I send a report to my personal board of advisors. And then there's sort of you've gotten into this a little bit about like how you measure time. And then there's this sub thread about the 9 questions I ask myself every week. So tell me more. I mean, you just seem like such a structured person. Like, tell me first of all about like, what is this personal board of advisors? Like, who's part of this? How did you form this? And then do you actually send them a report? Do they actually give you feedback? And then how did you develop these 9 questions that you ask yourself every week sort of as a way to self-reflect?
Yeah. So I've been doing this for around 2 years now. And when I say this, it's measuring different parts of myself on a weekly basis. And I think the philosophy behind this is, if you don't measure something, it's hard to improve it. So it's like, what are the parts of yourself that you care about? And then if you care about that thing about yourself, then you should probably measure it, because then you can improve in it. I think it's kind of like the trajectory of thought around it. And then the thing is, I've changed a lot in the last 2 years. So the things I've measured have changed too. It's gone from maybe I didn't even think about sleep 2 years ago. At the time, I think it was, I rated like different versions of myself. I had like a daily CEO David, like head of product David, chief marketer David, and these different I kind of give myself ratings based on the actions I did. I had a head of social responsibility David, corporate social, CSR, right? So I found myself as a company. I was like, oh, if I just see myself in this one way, and I have like different versions of myself that are operating, then I can just narrow in on each part of them and then optimize the overall David entity of me, right? And it's really this idea of, if I'm going to exist in this world, I might as well just keep getting better and get better faster. So I want to eventually get to the point where I can not just look at how much I'm progressing, but look at how fast I'm progressing, in whatever what are the metrics measure, whatever those things are, but yeah, so the way this report works is based on the quarter. So every 3 months I send out averages for that month across the board, show you how they changed over time. So whether, I think last month I went sleep down like 20 minutes on average which was okay. Like it wasn't great. I think I went up in a few areas of journaling, but I also went down in time I spent working out. So all these little things that kind of shape a picture of like, what's a screenshot, what's the logs of all of like David on a day-to-day basis. And it's really just a way it's also an excuse for me to reflect. I think that's another huge part of it too. So hopefully that answers some of the questions. I know there's a few in there too.
Yeah, for sure. And I would just encourage people listening to go follow David on Twitter, because you'll get a lot more information from him there. There's like so much to talk about. I mean, we could talk for hours about all of this stuff. I think, I would say I'd be willing to bet that the majority of people out there are not as disciplined and structured in measuring and evaluating how their life is. I think self-reflection is something that takes effort for most people and doesn't really come naturally. So I think that's great that you're doing that. All right. So David, tell us a little bit more about who you are outside of work, if there even is one. I mean, it sounds like you do have your life pretty well balanced. So I am curious to hear, what are some of your hobbies? What do you like to do in your free time when you're blocking off those periods of time for you to do fun things? Like, what are you doing, or any interesting fun facts about yourself that you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So what is I still skateboard, of course. It's something that's near and dear. It's hard to now. There's little snow on the ground. I host brunches. I'm really into brunches. That's something that I care a lot about. And not just typical brunches, but I like experimenting. I love just like people experiments, and not in a literal people experiment way, but in a like social experiment way of like, what happens if we take a really like targeted tough question and bring people together around like this format that I can kind of structure myself and then see how everyone engages in different ways, and like I want to be like a host. I want to make them feel comfortable. It's like, how do I elicit these types of information, this like types of feelings in this community, that like a pop-up community is the way I'm thinking about it. So I have this, actually, I'll show you on the camera here. I have this board here back when I was at Michigan. I'd host these brunches, and there's a bunch of signatures on that board. And
I love it.
Yeah, I had people sign it if they came through, and also making rules around it. Like, you can't know more than half the other people here. So we're just experimenting with that. I've started gotten into animation a bit recently. I went on a road trip in fall, so I do a little editing and stuff, but nothing too formal. I think at this point in my life, I just want to zero in on this one thing of intros, and then maybe I'll become more like a well-rounded human sometime in the next 10 years.
I mean, it sounds like you already are. So has COVID just been terrible for you for your brunches, or do you host virtual brunches now?
They've gotten better virtually, I think, because there's a few platforms out there that let you facilitate better brunches. So Icebreaker is a great one. They come. Actually, I'll invite you to a coming brunch. I would love for you to.
Awesome. I love that. I love meeting new people.
Sweet. I think you'll like it.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much. I've got two more quick little fun questions for you, just random things. If you were stranded on a desert island and you could only have one person with you, who would you want that person to be? It can be anybody, dead or alive.
Dead or alive? Wow. That's a good question. I'm stranded here for the rest of my life.
Well, I mean, unless you get, unless you choose Bear Grylls or somebody who's going to get you off the island.
Yeah. All right. Let's assume I have 5 days to live. Let's see. Assume I'm going to die. All right, assume I have no chance.
Okay.
Someone who's just like relentlessly optimistic. Let me think. Either my younger brother Michael, my friend Mars is incredibly optimistic about life, and like would just like find some way to make a positive spin to it. Friend Sophia is also in that way. Part of me wishes I would just like be alone, so I can kind of like, if we're both gonna die, I'd rather just kind of be the only one that goes out. But that's a good question. I like that one. Darn, I wish I had a better answer for you.
I mean, that's good though. It gets into like the way that you think of it. I think the interesting thing about this question is the way people think about it, right? So some people take a very pragmatic approach and they're like, I want Bear Grylls because I just want to get off this island and he's going to give me the best chances. But you have a very fatalistic approach. You're like, I'm going to die anyway. I just want someone to lift my spirits in my last minutes.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah, yeah. I don't know. Hopefully, it says something not terrible about me. But yeah, exactly. Like,
Yeah, no, I like it. And then the second question is, if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you want to have?
Yeah, I thought about this one actually. This is an important question. I don't know if this is a cheat code or not, but like I would love to just know like, any information I want to know at that given time. That'd be the coolest thing in the world, right? Just to know what someone's thinking, to know how to do something. I would just love just like not to know everything, but know something if I explicitly asked it. Like that's such a cool thing.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of I had Christiana Cromer on the podcast recently, and she said the superpower she wanted was speed reading. Basically, like you can just read a book like instantaneously, because if you can do that, then you can, similar to what you're saying, you can consume all the knowledge, anything that you want to know, you can just learn, super quick, so you can read it instantly.
I love that.
I thought that was a good one too. Yeah.
That is really good. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much, David, for coming on the podcast. I really enjoyed our conversation. Before you go, can you just tell people where they can find you if they want to connect with you personally, and then where they can go to learn more about intros and maybe sign up for the product?
Yeah. So Twitter is the brunch guy. I updated my handle, which is exciting. And then product is at intros.ai. It's pretty easy to get to. And yeah, there's a little form on there. So if you ever want to try it out, totally, we have a free trial for a couple months. So I would love to get you on board. And yeah, Diana, thanks for having me on here. I'll be sure to share around, and I'm excited to maybe get some more people on the podcast too. This is incredible.
Thanks, David. I appreciate that, and I look forward to joining one of your upcoming brunches. I'm serious. I really want to join one of those and meet some cool people that you have in your circle.
Oh, absolutely. I'll make sure to bring you in.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks again, David. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. And we will be back again soon with another episode of Startup Happy Hour.